everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it was really fun hosting the show without you. We had an emergency episode on Monday, and you were covering basketball, so it was like, well, the world is blowing up right now, so Kevin Noonan and I get to do it. So I got to do the power pause. Tony, the reviews are pouring in. Best episode of Buckeye Weekly ever. I'm not sure what would have changed, but people seem to love it. So
now, was that just from you and Kevin? Those reviews?
I don't think people put their names on them, but it was certainly from somewhere. I mean, reviews pouring in from Pickerington, Granville, all over the Columbus area and the state of Ohio.
I think it would have been nice if I had been offered to be on the show, Tom. You and Kevin apparently just went ahead and did it, and I found out after the fact. I'm going to claim innocence and complete ignorance here, which, Tom, you can't deny. You know you don't want to deny the ignorance part. Definitely
not. Today's show, we started, instead of Michigan Monday, we're doing Georgia Good Tuesday. I don't know. We're going to workshop that, but rewatching some of the big games of the season. We're going to just warn you up front. This is Georgia-Oregon, and if you are not familiar with how Georgia-Oregon went, sort of like Titanic iceberg, along those lines, we want to let you know, listen, do not jump off the roof. Please remember this is the same team that beat Kentucky 16-6 and Missouri 26-22 or something like that, so you're going to hear some very upsetting things on today's episode. But we will be getting to some of those other games a little later on before the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, just trigger warning for everybody. Just, maybe don't let the kids listen to this, that sort of thing. Just all of your standard true crime podcast, warnings there. And Tom, this was true crime. Georgia scored on their touchdowns on their first 7 drives, and I think the final one of those was with the backup quarterback. I think just to add some emphasis to that, but. Yeah, so this is our rewatch. So in what we do in our rewatch, we just go back and forth with 5 things that we've each learned. And Tom, it's amazing how much you can learn from something by watching it. This has been new to me, where you draw conclusions from stuff that you see with your own eyes. And so this was a nice exercise for me. And I'm interested to see how this process goes. Like, this is kind of like the first episode of a new series that we're starting, this is Breaking Bad, like this is the episode 1 of Breaking Bad type of thing, and there's going to be some highs and lows and some drama, and we've seen Georgia sporadically throughout the season, but never really sat down. I haven't sat down and just watched them like we did with this one. We saw the SEC championship game, as much as either of us could stand to stick with that. I think eventually you got to go do something else other than watch a bunch of Louisianans be murdered. But I will let you go first if you want to talk about the first thing that stuck out to you, or one thing that stuck out to you in this one.
Sure. The first thing, and I'm not going to count this, but Oregon head coach Chris Pratt. I mean, boy, was he before being head coach of Oregon? Did you like him on Parks and Rec? Because I thought he really nailed it. I was like, I'm trying to read Dan Lanning's lips, and I'm like, I think he just said mouse rat. Did he just say mouse rat? I feel like he just said mouse rat. Where's Aubrey Plaza? Where'd she go? Yeah. Boy, and I've seen him all year, and I'm like, who does he look like? He looks exactly like Chris Pratt. Okay, cool. Let's see. Boy, this is looking at this from Oregon's perspective, this was just a bunch of don't do what Donnie Don't does. Like, everything was just like, oh no, don't do that. Oh no, don't do that. Let's see. You should consider not giving Stetson Bennett quick, easy throws to receivers, because he's got a bunch of really good receivers. And, the wide receiver unit, like if you were just going to go stack up the talent in the wide receiver room, you would probably give Ohio State the edge over Georgia. But they also have 2 tight ends who are built like minivans and have the speed of, minivan at highway speed and are about as fun to tackle as minivans. And they have running backs out of the backfield who, Kenny McIntosh had 5 carries for 18 yards in this game, and then also had 127 yards receiving, or 117 yards receiving, something like that. It was just, the whole first half was just, oh, Oregon doesn't have anything for them. Like, the Oregon had no answers on defense for the passing offense, and the whole first half just looked so easy for Stetson Bennett. I think he finished the first half. Hang on, I have my notes here. It was something like 18 for 21. Yes, 18 for 21 for 254 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 rushing touchdown in the first half. And it's like, oh wow, he only accounted for 2 touchdowns. They must not have had a very good half. But also he was on pace for 508 yards and 36 for 42. So also it was kind of a good half. Boy, Tony, if you were a team that had just given up a bunch of big plays in the passing game against a team that probably doesn't have the athletes that Georgia does, this game might have been a little bit of a concerning one to watch.
Well, and I'll stick with a little bit of Stetson Bennett here. The first thing I always do before I do these rewatches or whatever, Michigan Monday, I look at the box score just so I have an idea of what is about to happen. Georgia had 20 first downs via the pass and like 5 via the run, to give you an idea of how much they were throwing. And, and then you see the Kenny McIntosh numbers, and I'll have more on him later, but Stetson Bennett, I assume he played like this throughout the season. Not like this, but how he was so comfortable in this game, and he had so much time, and he's just a very comfortable, confident guy. And you compare it to like JJ McCarthy, who was confident and cocky, but not always comfortable. Like, Stetson Bennett always felt comfortable in this game. Like, he never seemed out of sorts. He made some throws. And the thing that I think I liked best about him, and I want this as now a prerequisite for all of my quarterbacks, if you're going to be my quarterback, I need you to be able to fly with the Blue Angels. They showed a clip of him doing that in the offseason, and I don't care if the quarterback has that dog in him. If he's got that Blue Angel in him, then that's automatically, the dog is implied. And if your quarterback is brave enough to go do that, then he is brave enough to go face any kind of defense that's coming at him.
Yeah, I feel like Stetson Bennett, everyone looks at him like he's happy, scrappy hero pup, and it's like, oh, look at you, muss his hair, like, oh, look at you, you're so adorable, so little, and you're playing with the big boys, good for you. And then you watch him, and it's like, he's not big, he's not going to be an NFL quarterback, doesn't have the strongest arm, but he, if players are open, and guys are open for him frequently, if guys are open, boy, does he find them, and boy, does he distribute the ball well. And, he just constantly, he looks like he's about in trouble in the pocket. Oregon would get pressure on him, and there was one right before the half where they had 3 or 4 guys in there. I was like, oh, he's dead now. He's really going to get it. And just sort of like dips and dodges just a little bit, enough to buy time, and then just finds Ladd McConkey in the corner of the end zone wide open. And it just looks so easy for him. And, Oregon got pressure often enough that I'm like, well, I wonder if Ohio State can get pressure on him. And then you find yourself after a while wondering, even if Ohio State can get pressure on him, does it really matter that much?
That throw to Ladd McConkey in the end zone, because they even have like the view from like the spider camera or whatever behind it, so you can see like everything that Stetson Bennett can see, and it's like you barely see a glimpse of Ladd McConkey breaking free in the end zone, and he's dealing with people, and then once he has an opportunity to get rid of these people and throw it, he just flicks it, and McConkey is there. There's another one where it's just it was a quick pass, but he's looking to his right, and there's nothing there, and I swear he's throwing the ball as he's looking to the left, and he hits a guy there just on the seam, like on the hash, like maybe like an 8-yard reception to move the chains, but it's like I don't know that he actually saw somebody there, because like the head and the eyes and the arm were moving at the same time. But really, really impressed. I'm looking forward to not being impressed with him at some point this season, but this was not that game at all. Yeah,
this was not that game at all. And yes, I mean, again, let us once again take a moment for everyone's mental health and remind them that they beat Kentucky 16-6 with many of these same players playing in the game. So 26-22 against Missouri. Again, it was something like that. And, deep cleansing breaths. They're not all the Oregon game, but
27 points against Tennessee.
But Tony, the last two times Georgia has played in this very building, boy, they've put up an average of 49.5 points. So you kind of get where Ryan Day on Sunday was talking about the fact that hey, you gotta assume you're gonna have to score 45, high 40s into the 50s to win this game. So, well, I guess we'll see if they can do that. My next one, and I'm trying to decide which one you're most likely to steal. Let's try this one, Tony. First quarter of the first game of true freshman Malachi Stark's career. Tracks a deep ball and plays it better than I think any Ohio State corner has played a ball on a throw like that all season long. He's one-on-one, deep throw, tracks it, makes a very athletic play, gets in position in front of the receiver, reaches over his head, makes a really, really athletic play, brings it in for an interception, and it was just like, that's, that feels like, that has felt like where you would attack Georgia if you're Ohio State, is throwing the ball deep. And, again, you and I have not watched a ton of Georgia over the year just because you're busy, we're busy covering games on Saturday and traveling on Saturdays. And so, I've seen a lot of Georgia highlights. I have not sat down and watched a bunch of full Georgia games. So we'll see how consistent that is throughout the course of the season. But boy, that was a real impressive play for a true freshman in the first quarter of his college career.
Yeah, he sized him up. He tracked it. He did everything that you want in that situation. I will stick with the secondary, Tom, because I've got one exclamation point, and then a few minutes later, I've got another exclamation point. And that was safety Chris Smith, who is listed at like 5'11", 195, but he plays like he's Thomas Davis, former Georgia safety turned linebacker in the NFL. He hits. He had a couple interceptions in this game. I believe he plays mostly field, so the free safety type in Georgia's defense. And he was, he comes up and hits. He was a wow player for me. I don't know. If you're looking at the stats for Georgia over the year, like I think he is maybe like third in tackles. He's fourth in tackles with 50 on the season. But the team leader for Georgia has 64, and that's two guys. It's two linebackers. So, he just obviously they spread this out over a bunch of guys and they rotate a bunch of guys. But he was making some hits. Like I said, 2 interceptions. The one where Bo Nix threw a terrible pass in the seam, and Chris Smith just came running up and stealing it. Like I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, and that was one that play where he jumped that route was one where Oregon had kind of done a bunch of wide receiver screens and had set up like this is a fake wide receiver screen, and so instead of blocking the 3 receivers who are actually going to be out there or running routes, and Georgia was sitting in zone on that play and was absolutely not fooled. And he jumped the route, and we have all seen Bo Nix. We are familiar with Bo Nix, and there is the good Bo Nix and there is the bad Bo Nix, and that was a Bo Nix had decided before the play, this ball is going here, and I'm going to get it in there, and boy howdy did he get it in there right to Christopher Smith. But again, Christopher Smith was also, I believe, the one who in the third quarter, I think, there was a Oregon receiver running wide open downfield, and Bo Nix threw it out there, and, there's no one within 10 yards of him. And the guy grabs it, and Christopher Smith throws his shoulder into him and jars the ball loose. And it was just, this is one of these, like, get you a safety who can do both and, like, lay the lumber, jump a route, pick it off. Like, that was very impressive. And, again, this is someone who, if Ohio State's going to be working down the field, they're going to have to deal with those Georgia safeties. They're going to have to deal with those Georgia corners. And they're going to have to find a way to make that work. And, Kirby Smart is, as his last name, as his last name implies, a fairly intelligent man when it comes to defense. So you're going to have to either, you're not necessarily going to out-talent them. So you're going to have to, out rock, paper, scissors them, out-scheme them in some of these games and, keep them off balance in some way. And that seems like that's not going to be the easiest thing in the world to do.
Watching him, I'm thinking, well, it looks like I have a new top 5 player in the nation. Because you're not really necessarily looking at specific guys, especially on defense, because you're following the ball. But this is a guy that you follow the ball, boom, there he is. And really impressive.
Yeah. My next one, Georgia, I think people look at Georgia's point totals for games and go, boy, that's not a very good offense. But then if you look at points per drive, Georgia is actually a better offense than Michigan, a better offense, I think, than Alabama. I mean, they're scoring like 3-point-something points per drive, which is pretty darn good. And there was a stat that went up in the late third, maybe early fourth quarter, where this was just the second time in the last 15 years that a team scored touchdowns on their first 7 drives against an AP top 25 team. That was Georgia. That went up right at the end of the third quarter, maybe even the beginning of the fourth quarter, whenever they scored their last touchdown. And the other team that had done that was Ohio State against Michigan State the year before. Now, Ohio State did that against Michigan State in like 5 minutes left in the second quarter or something like that. Georgia, they're a little more methodical on offense. Mm-hmm. Oregon was able to sustain some drives against them, so you have fewer possessions, you have fewer opportunities. This is not going to be a 14 possession Peach Bowl, more than likely. It's going to be more 9 or 10, which is more, typically what you'd think of as a Michigan game, unless you're giving up long touchdowns, in which case, well, you maybe get more possessions. Good news, bad news situation. But, you've got that, and Georgia being a little more methodical. So when you look at Georgia's point totals, you got to kind of keep that in mind, bear that in mind, that there's a tempo element to why they have lower point totals. But the other thing was, earlier in the game, they're running tempo. You don't ever think of them as a tempo team. You think of them as a plodding, methodical team. But then on their opening drive, there were plays where they snapped it with 30 seconds left on the play clock. Like if they pick up a gain, like boom, get up the line, move it, and keep you off balance. Because they're not going to do that all the time, but they might do it occasionally to keep you off balance. They've got, they have a bunch of tools in their toolboxes, as Jim Knowles likes to say. And, that's something to keep an eye on, because you don't think of them as a tempo team, but they certainly can be if they want to.
And they were effective when they did it. There were a couple times Oregon didn't even get lined up, or the defensive linemen were looking at each other. And when they did go of tempo, they were throwing short, and Kenny McIntosh got a couple of catches there. And yeah, it was really, you didn't know when to expect it, and it generally caught Oregon's defense off guard. So you essentially have to be ready for it at all times, because if you don't know when it's going to happen, when you least expect it, that sort of thing. And Oregon didn't do a good job with that, and it was an effective usage by them, involving my next guy that I'll talk about, the next thing I'll talk about, and that's Kenny McIntosh. You mentioned him at the outset. The running back had over 100 yards receiving. He was, I have written here, Tom, Kenny McIntosh, = Curtis Samuel. That sort of thing, where that's kind of how they use him. They'll use him all over the place. He's lined up out wide. He's lined up in the slot, lined up in the backfield. They'll run stuff for him. Like I said, a lot of those, a couple of those tempo plays were throws to him, and it's just, I'll go get 7-8 yards. Boom. Now we're ahead of schedule, and you can do whatever you want. And it was just really effective usage of him, because it's a situation. I think he is third on the team in receptions. I'll pull it up here. Yeah, he is third on the team, 37 catches in 13 games. They have one wide receiver in their top 4, and that's Ladd McConkey in terms of receptions. Although I guess you can say Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, a former OSU target, as their number 5 receiver in yardage, but he's got 27 catches, so he's number 4 overall. Darnell Washington, their second tight end, number 5 overall. Sorry. But point being, they use Kenny McIntosh all over the place, and they use him effectively. He only has 1 touchdown catch on the year, but like he was a guy that they made, like, it seemed like there was a game plan there to get him involved, and they certainly made the most of it. So if you're going to focus on stopping Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, and you let Ladd McConkey do what he does, like, there's still that outlet, and not even an outlet. They will find a way to get the ball to Kenny McIntosh, and he was effective.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at that game plan for the Oregon game, it just, the first drive they come out and they throw on 9 of the first 11 plays of the opening drive, and then they score on an end around to Ladd McConkey. And, it was just right when you thought you knew what they were going to do, like, oh, sorry, change of plans. And you don't think of Georgia as a real throw-heavy team. You think of them as a grinded-out, big running team, and just throw to the tight ends a little bit. They will beat you however you would like to be beaten, and it does feel to me like that's an area where they might try to go after Ohio State, because we have seen Ohio State secondary bust. We have seen Ohio State secondary have trouble getting guys to the ground. Oregon had trouble getting guys to the ground, and that's a real good way to turn a short pass into a long pass. And you saw that against Michigan. Georgia's skill talent is substantially better than Michigan's. Substantially better than Michigan's. And I think that's going to be a real concern. Ohio State's going to have to tackle much, much better if they're going to keep this. If they're going to have a chance to win, they have to be able to get guys on the ground. Something else that my next one, something else they're going to have to do, Tony. They're going to have to not punt on from midfield like Dan Lanning did on the first drive. Opening drive, they reached midfield. I mean, nothing's looking easy, but then they had a receiver drop it on 3rd and 3. They punted on 4th and 3 from basically the 50. You can't do that. I mean, Oregon was going up and down the field a decent amount early in that game. They had, I'm going to pull up the drive chart real quick here. They had Oregon's first 5 drives. This was their 5 drives in the first half. 8 plays for 33 yards. They punt from their own 47. 6 plays for 22 yards. They throw an interception from their own 47. 7 plays for 46 yards. Down to the Georgia 29, they throw an interception. 12 plays for 58 yards, they kick a field goal. 4 plays for 39 yards, end of half. And the one that was where it ended up a field goal, they had 1st and 10 at the Georgia 11 and never got close to getting the ball into the end zone. They ran a keeper into the boundary for a loss of 1, threw it away on 2nd down, had a false start, and then Bo Nix tried to force the ball into a guy who was maybe at the 5-yard line. Honestly, probably could have and maybe should have been picked. And that was the end of their most successful drive of the day. Like, if you can't finish drives, you are in deep, deep trouble against Georgia. And here's the problem, Tony. No one's really finishing drives against Georgia. They, on the broadcast, they said 28% of touchdowns in the red zone. 28% touchdowns in the red zone allowed in 2021 for Georgia. So I thought, I wonder how much they've fallen off this year. Tony, they have fallen all the way to 32.1% touchdowns in the red zone. That's not as far as Ohio State fans probably would have liked to have heard that number drop. So, if Ohio State's scoring 1 touchdown every 3 trips to the red zone, they're going to lose this game by a whole bunch of points. So they're going to have to figure that out. And the problem is Georgia has big athletes, fast athletes, and I don't know that I remember Oregon throwing the ball actually into the end zone at any point during the game. Do you remember the ball ever going into the end zone, even on an incomplete pass?
It's usually just short stuff that they're trying to block into the end zone, if I recall. Yeah.
And that Ohio State's perimeter blocking this year has not been exemplary. So I don't know that that's going to be an option. So it feels like Ohio State's going to need to hit big plays. Ohio State's going to need to have the sort of Michigan game plan of you hit the big plays downfield, and you're going to have to throw it into tight windows against Georgia. You're not going to have busts like Michigan was going up against Ohio State.
Now, I will say, I did not see Oregon's last drive of the game, which may be the most telling when you consider that it was 19 plays for 87 yards, and it lasted from the 10-minute mark down to under 2 minutes. So 8 minutes and 47 seconds of drive against Georgia's backup. So maybe it doesn't mean all that much, but I did not watch it. Maybe they threw into the end zone on that one as they failed on downs. At least credit Oregon for not kicking a field goal to lose 49-6. You mentioned the big athletes, Tom, because let's talk about Jalen Carter, who had one good play in this where he kind of stood out. But other than that, I was expecting more because we saw more in the SEC championship game. So that was the most recent thing that I saw from him, and he was impressive. But I thought in this one, he got pushed around quite a bit, wasn't as active as I was expecting based on seeing him in the SEC championship game. He got double teamed and triple teamed here and there quite a bit, but when he wasn't, one guy was able to push him a few times, and this just caught me off guard. I was expecting more. He finished with how many tackles? And this one, I'm just scrolling through the box score: 1 tackle, 2 quarterback hurries. But I was pretty underwhelmed, so I expect to be overwhelmed at some point by him. But this was not that game.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about the Georgia defense was they didn't have anyone in that game who was, absolutely incredible, the 15 tackles kind of guy, anything like that. It was just sort of a really solid defense all around. The leading tackler was Malachi Starks, who's a corner. Christopher Smith is safety, 6 tackles, was the second leading tackler. The guys who they featured before the game, they featured Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, and Keely Ringo. Keely Ringo had 3 tackles. Nolan Smith had 2 tackles, and Jalen Carter had 1. And, I think that's maybe almost a little bit concerning to me, where they had such a dominant defensive performance. And it's not, well, if you can just scheme against this guy, if you can scheme against that guy, that's great. There's 8 other guys out there who are also all-world caliber players for the most part. And, that's something. I don't know if that's good news or bad news for Ohio State, that you can, okay, well, if those 3 guys are functionally not a factor in the game, they featured those 3 guys, and I don't know if they actually talked about any of them at any point during the game. They were just kind of there, and Oregon still didn't cash in on anything. That I think it'd have to be a little concerning.
Yeah, and people like to talk about Nolan Smith as a well-known guy. 7 tackles for loss on the season in 8 games this year. He had 3 sacks. He is their starting outside linebacker. And this one, just to give an idea of what kind of defense Georgia normally is, they're normally a 3-4, but in this one, basically a 4-2. Nolan Smith plays on the line, and they've got 4 down linemen with Nolan Smith being there, and then the 2 inside linebackers, and then they're playing 5 defensive backs. So very easy transition for them to go from a 3-4 to a 4-2-5 against a spread team. So I assume that's what we'll see when these 2 teams play again, is when Ohio State and Georgia play, they'll be the 4-2-5 that they saw. But there was one point where I think Nolan Smith came out early in the game, and then Oregon went up tempo to keep, basically, I think, to keep him off the field a little bit, and they were successful for a bit as well. So just, like you said, they rotate a bunch of guys. They'll be in, you're looking for number 4, Nolan Smith. Where is he? Oh, somebody else is in, and then that guy is making some sort of a distraction or a play, but there's so many different guys, and they're not on the field that long, so it's hard to pile up big numbers because, these 5, 6 and outs, that sort of thing. The long sustained drive, like I said, was in the game's final quarter when no starters were left. My final, I've got several other things here, but the one other thing that I have starred here is that the Georgia fans in that neutral site stadium were very loud. Mm-hmm. And Ohio State better be ready for a very loud neutral site stadium again this coming game, because it was very loud. And then when Oregon got the ball, it was very quiet. Or when Georgia got the ball, it was very quiet. So that's going to be a situation that they need to be prepared for, because it was consistent and it was loud. And I think it's something that when you have Ohio State having play clock issues, delay of game issues, communication issues, special teams issues, all of these things can be made worse by not being able to hear. Offensive line, false start issues, all of that can be made worse by a loud fan base. And I'm not just talking about the Buckeye fans booing. I'm talking about the Georgia fans cheering. So that's got to be a concern. And are they practicing? Is Ohio State going to practice with the noise on or the music on? And this leading up to it, some coaches don't like to do that. Others do to prepare them. They might want to practice all silent stuff, because I think it's going to be very loud for Ohio State.
Yeah, I don't know that I saw a total wide shot of the stadium where you could see 75-80% of the stadium, but the shots that you did see, it was kind of Oregon fans on one side, maybe between the 30s or so in the lower deck, and I don't know what the upper deck looked like, but it looked like there were about 15,000 maybe Oregon fans there, maybe fewer than that. And Oregon fans didn't travel tremendously well to Columbus last year either. There were sort of normal sections, but it was not anything close to you have seen other teams come in and sort of try and take the stadium over, or have Ohio State will kind of take the stadium over on the road. You didn't see that with Oregon, and I would expect there to be more Ohio State fans at the Peach Bowl than there were for Oregon fans for this game. But yeah, I would certainly expect it to be well over 50-50 in terms of Georgia. So yeah, I think you have to practice with silent count, and that's Ohio State performed reasonably well in their only like truly hostile environment this year at Penn State, and they performed fine and didn't have too many penalties, but they've been a little off kilter for big chunks of the season even without that. So if Georgia gets out to a lead and it's real loud in there, that's going to take some real intestinal fortitude to stick with it and not kind of start spiraling there. So Tony, my last one, going east-west against Georgia doesn't seem like a real good idea unless there's like misdirection involved. If you're running an end around or something like that, like, okay, that's fine. Maybe the jet motion will work if you get a kind of quick hitter on that. But boy, just like sweeps, like maybe just take those and let's just put a pin in those and save those for Youngstown State next year. I think you just got to get north-south against this team, and it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be sexy. It's just going to be like get your 4 yards, get your 5 yards, go north-south, put your foot in the ground. Don't try and dance. Don't try and change field. Like, just get upfield and get what you can get. Going east-west is not a good idea. Oregon, I went back and looked. Oregon only returned one kickoff all game. They returned the opening kickoff and took it all the way back, Tony, to the 14-yard line. Given the level of athletes on Georgia's kick coverage, you might just want to fair catch that and take the ball at the 25 and be grateful for that. This just feels like a game where you are much more likely to get tackled at the 12-yard line than you are to break one and take one out to midfield. We'll see if Ohio State agrees with me on that, but this does not feel like a game where Ohio State's real likely to bust one.
Well, and you're watching that game and you're imagining Ohio State running like stretch plays and seeing them just get blown up at the line of scrimmage because they take too long. And one of these safeties comes down and blows it up. And so, yeah, and then if you just go stick between the tackles, stick north and south, well, there's Jalen Carter and his 330 pounds or whatever waiting for you. So you just got to pick the right poison and gulp it down, I guess, as best you can. I'm just looking here. The team leader for sacks for Georgia, 3 players with 3 sacks this season. Like, everything is spread around. And of course, every time they face a team, those teams are trying to throw the ball as quickly as possible, so they're not getting attacked by that Georgia defense. A couple of other things I wanted to mention. Georgia 9 of 10 on third downs in this one, which if you're 9 of 10, if you only have 10 third downs, that's a pretty good sign. If you're 90% is generally a winning number, I bet. I haven't done the research. I could call up the Elias Sports Bureau after we're done with this and say, hey, do you guys do football? And they'll tell me. Tight ends Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers. Good luck with that. I like what Tyler Shoemaker and Ross Fulton have been saying. Maybe that's Sonny Styles. Time for some Sonny Styles action to match up with one of those guys. And I think I mentioned it on one of the live shows, but I had an NFL scout tell me like Darnell Washington is the premier NFL prospect that you could design. And when you watch him in this game, particularly, like, he's leaping over dudes. He looks like a created player, and they get the ball to him a couple of times a game. He's very, very effective. Brock Bowers he just drifts open. Like, he's running over the middle of the field and he starts to run down the seam. Then it just becomes a post and nobody can stay with him and keep up with him. So he's one. I thought the offensive line, the pass blocking were really, really good as well. Stetson Bennett had so much time at times, and when it got a little bit of pressure to him, he can just step up and do something with it. So they keep him clean and comfortable, and he makes everybody pay, at least as far as we know. We'll see how the rest of the episodes go, Tom.
Yeah, you watch that game, and it's like, well, I know he finishes the season with 20 touchdowns passing, so it's not too many, he's not going to sort of start to explode for 6 touchdowns every week, but it was ruthlessly efficient is how I would describe Stetson Bennett's performance in that game. Darnell Washington listed at 6'7", 270. Gotta say, I believe it. I think that's probably true. And yeah, I think this is one where Ohio State has to go in and just, you can't do what you did all season. Like, sorry, there is no one on the defense that is a good matchup for Darnell Washington. So I think you put the fast, athletic guy who looks like he loves to drill people and just like, sure, go get him. Like, I don't know what else to do, because if it's not him, I don't think it's going to work. You mentioned the third down efficiency. In the first half, or early in the third quarter, There was a point where Georgia was 6 of 6 on third downs. Oregon was 6 for 8. Normally, if you're 6 for 8 on third downs, it's like, wow, boy, I bet this was an incredible shootout. And the score was 35-3. So, you can't turn the ball over. You cannot have the third downs you're failing on be in the red zone, because then, you end up with, you cannot waste possessions against Georgia. You cannot waste them with field goals. You cannot waste them with interceptions. And functionally, those two things might be almost the same. Like a field goal is not quite a turnover, but it's a lot closer to a turnover than it is to a touchdown in a game like this. Georgia in the first half, 4 drives. This again goes to the thing about tempo from earlier. 4 drives, 4 touchdowns, 9.5 yards per play. And then the first drive of the second half, they actually increased that yards per play because they went 6 plays for 64 yards. So they were pushing 10 yards per play at the point where it was 35-3. If Georgia is putting up 10 yards per play, that is probably not going to be an outstanding day for Ohio State.
No, definitely not. Tom, anything else? And again, we will look at some Georgia games where they look mortal. This was not one of those. Perhaps we should have started out a little slower, but we really wanted to just smack you in the face, wake you up in case you were thinking Georgia wasn't all that. I believe they're a pretty good team. This cemented that for me. Maybe we'll learn later on in the season, and I say this season as we watch this television show of Georgia football play out, we will eventually, like all of these main characters, all of these superheroes, they have their flaws, they have their things that make them mortal, and we will eventually get into them. But at first, you got to see them at their strongest so that you can appreciate them at their weakest. That's the narrative arc that you have to go through to make something entertaining, right, Tom?
Yes, if you don't love us at our Georgia-Oregon, you don't deserve us at our Georgia-Missouri. So you just bear that in mind. One other thing, just again, don't jump off the roof. Here's Todd Blackledge, the most accurate quote I think I've ever heard a color guy give on a broadcast. Quote, "I don't think Oregon has any wide receivers that Georgia's scared of." Yeah, I think that's probably true. So, how much does this apply to what is going to happen with Ohio State? I mean, we'll see. We'll see how scared Georgia is of Ohio State's wide receivers. There was a lot of, Oregon making yards with Bo Nix runs that I don't think is necessarily stuff Ohio State's going to be able to do. But if that's why I think Ohio State throwing downfield is going to be probably the single biggest thing. Get 4 yards on the ground and be able to throw the ball downfield.
Yeah, and Bo Nix missed some throws. Ohio State can't afford to miss throws, but we've got time to talk about it. And we will do that throughout the rest of the month and then some. So that will do it for us here. I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Say hello to us there on the message board. Pretty busy time right now on the board, on the message board there with coaching hires, coaching departures. Have you guys heard about this transfer portal thing? Because it is pretty wild. Lots of stuff going on there. So join up, become a member, talk about it there, and man, it's going crazy right now. Also, of course, you can find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, and go ahead and hit the thumbs up on this video. Subscribe, hit the bell to be notified when we drop stuff and go live and all of those sorts of things, because we're going to be doing that quite a bit here moving forward. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.